It is a short, punchy, and emotionally charged hook for your story. She looked at me and smiled, like they've been waiting for me all along. It's mysterious, romantic, and immediately pulls viewers in, hinting at a slow burn connection while keeping it YouTube safe. The moment I first saw her, it felt like the world had subtly shifted, though nothing had actually changed. I was wandering through the small, sunlit cafe on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the faint smell of coffee and old books lingering in the air, when she appeared. She wasn't loud or flashy, but there was a quiet gravity to her presence that made everything else in the room blur slightly at the edges. She stood by the window, framed by the soft drizzle outside, her hair catching the golden light that spilled in from the street. There was a calmness in the way she moved, an elegance that didn't demand attention but somehow commanded it. Her dress, simple yet refined, flowed gently as she turned to glance at something on a shelf, and the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm, faintly floral, wafted toward me. I didn't even realize they stopped walking until I caught my own reflection in the glass beside her, noticing how my heart seemed to tighten without reason. Then our eyes met. It was brief, almost accidental, but it was enough. Her gaze held a quiet intelligence, a softness that hinted at both strength and vulnerability, and a spark of something unspoken lingered there, as if she had been quietly anticipating this moment long before I ever arrived. I found myself smiling back, hesitant, uncertain, but unable to look away. There was a fleeting shyness in her glance, the kind that makes you feel like you've stumbled into something significant without even realizing it. I lingered near the corner of the room, pretending to browse the books on the shelf, but I couldn't stop noticing the small details, the way her fingers traced the edge of a page, the gentle tilt of her head as she studied a painting on the wall, the soft curve of her smile that appeared just for a moment and then vanished. Every motion felt deliberate yet effortless, each one pulling my attention deeper. I realized my chest had tightened in an almost physical ache, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something I couldn't yet name. Time seemed to slow around her. The usual hum of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the murmur of conversations, faded into a quiet backdrop, a stage set solely for her. I noticed the faint rustle of her clothing as she shifted weight from one foot to the other, the delicate shimmer of sunlight on her hair, and the faint but undeniable warmth radiating from her presence. Even standing a few feet away, I felt it like a gentle pull toward her. Then she smiled. It wasn't a casual smile or a polite nod. It was the kind of smile that makes the air seem softer, that somehow reaches into the corners of your chest and leaves you unsettled in the best way. There was a knowing quality to it, as though she had been quietly expecting me all along, waiting for this exact instant. I wanted to walk over, to speak, to introduce myself, but my legs felt rooted to the floor, caught somewhere between hesitation and a magnetic curiosity that refused to let go. That first encounter was brief, but it left a lingering impression, a quiet heartbeat of anticipation. I didn't yet know her story, her voice, or her laugh, but in that single, fleeting moment, I felt something rare, the unmistakable pull of a connection that neither time nor circumstance could ignore. The slow burn had begun. I didn't plan to speak to her, yet the moment presented itself as if it had been waiting for me, just as her smile had suggested. She was perched on a stool near the corner of the cafe, a book resting open in her hands, fingers lightly tracing the lines of text. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain, a soft warmth contrasting with the chill outside. I lingered nearby, pretending to examine the shelves, though every detail of her presence drew my attention. Then she looked up, and our eyes met again. This time, there was no fleeting glance, her gaze lingered, curious but unassuming, as though she were inviting me into her world without a single word. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a small step closer. My fingers brushed against a book I didn't intend to pick up, and I caught myself smiling awkwardly. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle invitation to speak, a soft crease appearing between her brows that somehow made her look both thoughtful and approachable. "I've always loved this author," she said, her voice gentle, warm, carrying a melodic cadence that made even the simplest words feel intimate. "They have a way of seeing things others overlook." Her eyes held mine for a moment longer, curious and open. I felt a sudden urge to respond, but also a quiet reverence, speaking felt almost sacred in her presence. "Me too," I managed, my voice quieter than I expected. I never noticed how ordinary moments can feel extraordinary in their words. I noticed a faint smile tug at her lips, the kind that hints at shared understanding. The space between us seemed charged yet calm, like the moment before rain falls softly on a quiet street. We began to talk in small bursts, about books, the weather, the subtle beauty of the café itself. Conversation felt effortless, but it was layered with unspoken observation. He noticed how her fingers brushed the edge of the table when she laughed, how her posture shifted subtly when she leaned in to emphasize a point. Each gesture, so natural and unstudied, pulled me deeper into her orbit. There was something in the rhythm of her voice, the cadence of her laughter, that settled in my chest like the first quiet pulse of warmth. At one point, our hands brushed accidentally while reaching for the same book. A spark traveled from that small contact, brief yet electric. She didn't pull away, instead, she let her fingers linger a fraction longer than necessary. I felt my heart thrum, aware of the gentle intimacy of that touch without words, of a boundary both respected and gently tested. There were pauses too, comfortable silences where words weren't necessary. We simply observed each other, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how the light caught her eyes just so, how she seemed simultaneously distant in thought and present in the room. Those quiet moments were magnetic, almost unbearable in their subtle intensity. By the time I realized how long we had been talking, I felt an unexpected calm, a gentle sense that the world had narrowed to this corner of the café. There was anticipation, yes, but also a rare comfort, as if our connection had been quietly unfolding for far longer than the few minutes we had spent together. Her smile lingered as our conversation drew to a natural pause, a soft curve that promised more without demanding it. And for the first time, I truly wondered what it would feel like to be near her again. After our first conversation, the café seemed impossibly quiet without her. The warmth of her presence lingered in my chest, a gentle ache of anticipation I hadn't expected. I found myself returning the next day, unsure if I'd see her again, and yet, as if guided by some subtle thread, she was there, this time near the window, the rain outside streaking the glass like delicate watercolor brushstrokes. She noticed me immediately, and her smile, the one that had unsettled me in the most welcome way, was waiting. It wasn't just a greeting, it felt like an acknowledgement of something neither of us had yet named. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her, a simple invitation, and I felt the odd thrill of being seen, of being quietly welcomed into her space. We fell into conversation again, effortlessly. This time, it felt different, less tentative, more familiar, as if the air between us had been conditioned by yesterday's unspoken understanding. The sound of her voice was warmer in the quiet café, carrying the soft hum of curiosity and ease. I noticed how her hand brushed the table edge as she gestured, a small motion that somehow drew my attention more than it should. Then she surprised me, "Would you like to join me for a walk? The rain makes the city look different. Gammy, I think." Her offer wasn't flashy or forward, it was casual, almost offhand, but the subtext was unmistakable. She wanted me there. He hesitated for only a moment, caught between social caution and a sudden eagerness I didn't entirely understand, before nodding. Old Side, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the streets glistened under the streetlights. The air smelled of wet pavement and earth, mingling faintly with the comforting scent she carried. She walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed occasionally. Each touch was slight, incidental, yet it sent ripples through my chest that I couldn't ignore. Her presence was a quiet magnet, drawing me nearer without urgency. We moved slowly, talking about small things, a sculpture in a nearby plaza, the curve of the river, the sound of rain on the cobblestones, but underneath the easy chatter, there was a palpable tension. Every glance carried more than curiosity, every smile hinted at recognition, at shared awareness. He noticed how her hair clung slightly to her neck in the drizzle, how the light caught her eyes and made them almost luminescent, and I wanted to tell her, in some careful way, that this moment mattered to me more than I had anticipated. At one point, our arms brushed intentionally, she adjusted her scarf, I shifted to match her pace, and I felt the warmth of proximity, subtle but undeniable. My pulse quickened, though neither of us commented. Silence became part of the dialogue, the quiet acknowledgement of something tentative yet real, a trust being gently built, a connection being drawn out slowly like the first brush of sunlight after rain. By the time we returned to the café, there was an unspoken agreement between us, this wasn't just a casual encounter anymore. She had invited me, chosen to share a space outside the familiar confines of the room, and the world had shifted again, subtly, imperceptibly. I felt anticipation, but also a comforting calm, like the first chapter of a story I was meant to read slowly, savoring every line. Her smile lingered as she said goodbye, soft and knowing. He walked away with the quiet certainty that this unexpected invitation was only the beginning. Something was unfolding, delicate and precise, and I was entirely unprepared, but completely willing, to follow it wherever it might lead. The following days were a quiet continuation of that fragile, unspoken bond. I found myself drawn to her presence, not just the warmth in her smile or the elegance in her movements, but the subtle gravity that seemed to anchor everything around her. One evening, the café had emptied except for a few lingering patrons. She invited me to sit with her, and for the first time, the conversation shifted, away from light observations, towards something softer, more personal. She spoke of her past with a gentle honesty that caught me off guard. Not in dramatic bursts, but in quiet reflections, moments of fear, disappointment, and choices made with both courage and hesitation. Her voice, soft but steady, carried the weight of experience. He noticed her hands on the table, fingertips tracing the wood grain as if grounding herself in the moment. The way she looked up at me then, eyes meeting mine without shame or pretense, made me feel an unexpected responsibility, to listen, to understand, and to be present. Though shared fragments of my own story, the small vulnerabilities I usually kept tucked away. My voice faltered occasionally, but her presence made the discomfort easier to bear. She nodded, encouraging, empathetic, leaning slightly forward as if to silently assure me that my words mattered, that they were being received not with judgment but with recognition. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a warm, familiar touch against the crisp evening atmosphere. Our hands brushed accidentally, a fleeting contact that seemed to linger a fraction longer than natural. He felt an unexpected warmth, a quiet thrum of connection that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with trust. She didn't pull away. Instead, there was a subtle acknowledgement in her eyes, a softening of her expression that seemed to say, "This is safe. This is real." The weight of that moment, the stillness, the mutual understanding, was more intimate than anything I had expected from our first few meetings. We spoke in low tones, sharing small regrets, hidden dreams, the gentle anxieties that shape one's life. Her laughter, soft and unrestrained at times, punctuated the conversation like sunlight through the rain, rare, but illuminating. He noticed how her shoulders relaxed when I shared something personal, and how the light in her eyes flickered in quiet approval. Every word, every pause, every gesture built a bridge between us, subtle and deliberate. As the evening wore on, the world outside seemed to fade. The hum of distant traffic, the faint clatter of dishes, even the drizzle outside the window became background noise to the delicate intimacy forming across the table. He realized I was no longer just observing her, I was participating in a shared space of emotional honesty, one that neither of us could have anticipated but both were willing to explore. When it was finally time to leave, our hands met naturally as she stood. There was no rush, no awkward withdrawal, just the gentle, lingering warmth of connection. That touch, small as it seemed, carried unspoken reassurance. We were both present, both willing, and both aware that something significant was quietly unfolding. For the first time, I understood that this slow burn wasn't about instant passion, it was about trust, about seeing each other clearly, and about the courage to reveal the parts of ourselves we usually kept hidden. And in that shared vulnerability, the foundation of something rare and enduring was being laid. The bond between us had been quietly growing, a careful weaving of words, gestures, and stolen glances. That afternoon, she invited me to help her with something small yet meaningful, arranging books in her studio, a casual task that carried with it a sense of intimacy I hadn't anticipated. The space was warm and softly lit, filled with the faint scent of old paper and lavender, a subtle comfort that made my nerves settle into something almost like peace. We moved together among the shelves, our shoulders brushing lightly, accidentally at first, then almost intentionally. He felt the warmth of her body in those brief touches, the subtle heat of proximity spreading through me like sunlight through a cloudy morning. Each movement carried a rhythm, a quiet choreography of closeness that neither of us needed to acknowledge aloud. At one point, we reached for the same book. Our hands met, fingers brushing lightly. He felt a shiver, not of nervousness, but of awareness, a pulse of connection that radiated up my arm. She didn't pull back, instead, she looked at me with those steady, knowing eyes and a small, almost shy smile. That single touch lingered in my mind far longer than the contact itself, and I realized how rare it was to feel something so delicate yet undeniable in a fleeting instant. As we continued, the quiet moments between words became more charged than the conversation itself. I noticed the way her hair fell across her shoulder, how the soft light caught the curve of her neck, and how her eyes softened when she looked at me during a pause. I found myself leaning slightly closer than necessary, compelled not by force or urgency, but by the desire to inhabit the same small space with her, to feel the shared warmth of proximity. She laughed softly at a small joke I made, and in that moment, she leaned slightly toward me. The faint brush of her shoulder against mine felt like a quiet invitation, a gentle acknowledgement of the tension simmering between us. I resisted the urge to make it more than it was, to maintain the careful boundaries we had nurtured so far, yet the awareness of her nearness was intoxicating. Every breath, every movement, seemed amplified, imbued with significance we didn't need to name. We paused to adjust a stack of books together, standing close enough that I could feel the subtle heat of her arm against mine. The room, the books, the muted sunlight, everything faded to the background. All that mattered was this shared, unspoken intimacy, the quiet closeness of two people discovering the depth of a connection without rushing, without forcing it into words or gestures that might break the fragile beauty of the moment. When our task was done, we lingered, neither of us speaking immediately. I caught her glance, the slight tilt of her head, the softness in her expression, and I realized that this first close moment, this deliberate yet gentle proximity, had shifted something between us. It was no longer just curiosity, no longer just attraction. There was warmth, there was tension, and there was trust, all woven together in a fragile, unspoken bond that neither of us wanted to disturb. For the first time, I understood that intimacy could exist without urgency, that closeness could be experienced in the brush of a shoulder, the fleeting touch of fingers, the quiet acknowledgement of presence. And in that understanding, I felt something rare, the slow, steady building of a connection that could endure, carefully, patiently, beautifully. By the time we met that evening, the air between us had grown quieter, deeper, charged with a familiarity that neither of us needed to define. The café was nearly empty, the gentle hum of the world outside falling away like the soft patter of rain on a distant roof. She invited me to sit closer, and this time, there was a subtle confidence in her gesture, a quiet acknowledgement that she trusted me more than she had before. We began talking, first in gentle, casual tones, then slowly moving toward more personal revelations. She spoke about a heartbreak long past, the kind that leaves invisible marks, softened but never entirely erased. Her voice was calm, even, but the faint tremor in her words betrayed the tenderness beneath. I noticed how her fingers absently traced the rim of her coffee cup, a grounding motion, and I leaned slightly toward her, feeling an instinctive need to offer steadiness. You know, she said softly, sometimes I feel like Ibe lived two lives, the one everyone sees and the one only I know. The one with mistakes, regrets, longing. Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching, and I felt a rare vulnerability in the honesty. In that moment, I realized that the careful poise she carried in the world was only part of her. Beneath it was a delicate, deeply human complexity that invited both respect and connection. I shared my own hesitations and quiet insecurities, the small disappointments and the silent hopes that I rarely spoke aloud. Her gaze never wavered, there was no judgment, only a steady warmth, a reassurance that my words were welcome. Her presence was magnetic in its calm intensity, the kind that made even confessions of weakness feel safe. The faint scent of her perfume, the subtle warmth radiating from her hands as she rested them on the table, made the space feel intimate, coconut, suspended from the rush of the outside world. At one point, our hands met, intentionally this time. She placed her hand over mine, her touch soft and steady, grounding me in the moment. The warmth that radiated from that simple gesture was electric in its subtlety. It wasn't a desire in the impulsive sense, but a quiet affirmation, I am here, present, and I see you. That hand resting lightly on mine spoke volumes, conveying care, empathy, and the deepening trust that had been growing between us over the past days. We shared more, small regrets, lingering doubts, and silent dreams that had been hidden from the world. Every word she spoke, every pause, was a thread weaving us closer together. The emotional intimacy built alongside the subtle physical touches, the gentle brush of her fingers against mine, the tilt of her shoulder toward me when she leaned in, created a connection that was tender, profound, and beautifully human. By the time we left the café, the world outside seemed distant, a backdrop to the rare, slow-burning intimacy we had begun to share. That evening marked a turning point, the first real acknowledgement that what was developing between us was not mere curiosity or casual attraction, but a meaningful bond founded on vulnerability, trust, and unspoken understanding. In that quiet revelation, I understood the power of presence, the way emotional honesty, coupled with subtle gestures, could draw two people together more intensely than any words of passion ever could. We parted that night with lingering warmth in our hands and hearts, aware that something significant had begun, delicate and patient, yet impossible to ignore. The days that followed felt like the soft unfolding of something precious and rare. Each encounter with her carried the same quiet thrill, the same slow pulse of anticipation and comfort intertwined. We met often, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by chance, but every meeting deepened the bond we were carefully building. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was subtle, measured, deliberate, a slow-burning connection that neither of us wanted to rush. That afternoon, we found ourselves together in the park near her favorite spot, a small bench under a sprawling oak tree whose leaves whispered gently in the breeze. The light was soft, golden, filtering through the branches, and the air smelled faintly of earth and rain from the morning shower. She leaned slightly toward me as we sat, a natural closeness that spoke louder than words. Her hand brushed mine lightly, lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth settle in my chest, steady and familiar. We spoke little, letting silence stretch comfortably between us. Occasionally, her fingers would tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a subtle, intimate gesture that I noticed with acute awareness. When she laughed softly at something trivial, it felt like music threaded through the quiet afternoon, and I found myself smiling without thinking. There was an ease in being near her, a rare comfort that only comes when someone truly sees you and lets you see them in return. At one point, I reached out gently, taking her hand fully in mine. She didn't pull away, instead, she rested her other hand lightly on top of ours. The warmth of her skin, the slight pressure, the steady pulse beneath her palm, it was grounding, affirming. That simple touch communicated far more than words ever could. It said, without speaking, I trust you, I am here, and this, whatever it is between us, is real. We watched the sunlight shift through the branches, our shoulders brushing as we leaned into the shared quiet. The city around us felt distant, irrelevant, as if time had paused for this small, intimate bubble we were inhabiting. I felt her breath occasionally against my arm, her subtle movement as she shifted to face me, the light catch in her eyes as she smiled gently. Every gesture was tender, deliberate, full of unspoken meaning. Finally, as the afternoon waned into early evening, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. The weight was soft, comforting, and steady. I felt her cheek warm against my chest, her hair brushing my arm, and in that moment, the emotional and physical closeness we had been cultivating felt complete. It wasn't a sudden revelation or dramatic confession, it was quiet, steady, perfect in its simplicity. When we stood to leave, our hands lingered together, fingers entwined, a gentle acknowledgement that this bond would continue to grow, nurtured by trust, respect, and shared presence. Her smile followed me as we parted, lingering in my mind long after she was gone. It was the smile of someone who had quietly welcomed me into her world and who, in return, had allowed me to share my own. In the end, it was not grand gestures or dramatic declarations that defined our connection, it was the quiet moments, the subtle touches, the shared silences, and the slow, patient unfolding of trust and intimacy. That slow burn, nurtured over days and weeks, had blossomed into a gentle, profound closeness. And in that warmth, I realized something rare and enduring, that sometimes, love isn't loud, it's the quiet, steady presence of someone who sees you, values you, and allows you to see and value them in return.